this on? Do I need to put it closer?
There you go. It is on.
Put it here because it's... Hello, hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to Lunch and Learn that we have today with Robert Craig. See a lot of new faces here today. We normally do these programs in the evening with beer and wine, so it's a little different with a lot of Chick-fil-A today. But appreciate you coming out. Today we're going to learn about what has happened with all the architecture with the California fires. But before we do that, we do have a lot of upcoming programs and events coming up. Thursday we have our 17th annual Black History Month celebration. That's all about celebrating the Caribbean diaspora here in DeKalb County. But then we also have a lot of other architecture related events coming up. We are involved with Phoenix Fly, so I'll be leading architecture tours of downtown Decatur starting in March. And then those will continue through really the summer and into fall. But then also, the next lecture by Robert Craig is about his travels through Egypt and the Nile. So that'll be a really good program. It'll be in two parts, so part un and part deux.
All in the same night.
All in the same night.
Double
So
feature.
Bring your protein bars, bring your snacks. It'll be a really good lecture and really fascinating. He'll compare his travels to historic photographs. But that is, that's March 6th. So, geez, it's coming up next
Quickly.
next week, and it's free. So we have a lot of other events and programs, and if you're not on our email list, we have an email sign-up sheet. I know we have a lot of members here today. And then we also have our newsletters too. So if you're not a member, feel free to grab one of our newsletters. It just really showcases what we do. But with that, I will turn it over. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. How is this mic doing? Is this good? No?
Closer to your mouth.
How about?
That's a little better.
Okay. This is going to be right down my throat, I think. Okay. Well, on January 7th, 2025, about 10:30 a.m., a brush fire broke out in Pacific Palisades, which is a neighborhood east of Malibu. And due to 7 months of rain-free weather and dry brush throughout the Southern California area, the fire exploded, spread by increasingly high winds, soon reaching hurricane force. They literally got to be 75 to 100 miles an hour. By 10:30 the next morning, that fire had burned 10,000 acres, almost 4 times the acreage of the city of Decatur. Approximately 8 hours after the Palisade fire broke out, the Eaton fire started in the foothills of the Angeles National Forest in Los Angeles County, and winds spread it quickly into the residential neighborhoods and commercial districts of Altadena. By midnight the first evening, the Eaton fire had consumed over 1,000 acres, and its flying embers were setting structures afire a mile away. By 6:30 a.m. the next morning, the fire had grown to over 2,227 acres. 4 hours later, it reached 10,600 acres, still 0% contained. That's the size of another 4 Decaturs. Evacuation orders were issued, and of course, but as gale force winds blasted fiery walls of red and orange and thick black smoke down the hill slopes, consuming everything in their wake, residences with only minutes to escape fled for their lives. Some looked out their window and snapped a few pictures as they were leaving their house. And literally in their backyard, the fire was arriving. A few tried to take their fire hoses and climb on their roof and try to wet down the roofs or put out fires that were already consuming their homes. Most heeded evacuation orders and fled, but streets were clogged with cars, traffic jams ensued, and many just left their cars on the road and fled by foot. That's the traffic jam on Sunset Boulevard when they were trying to just leave one area of the Hollywood Hills. This, of course, impeded fire trucks' access to areas when they abandoned their cars. So bulldozers had to start just moving cars out of the way to create traffic lanes. And as fires caught up to the abandoned cars, they too were set aflame. A part of the cleanup effort then became the removal of all these burnout automobiles, and sometimes whole parking lots full of them. The impact on houses and other structures, the devastation of whole neighborhoods was described as literally apocalyptic. A virtual war zone of ashes and debris affecting indiscriminately the rich and the poor, $100,000 cottages and $100 million mansions. At least 29 people were killed in the two largest fires, 17 in the Eaton fire and 12 in the Palisades fire. 2 days later, another fire, the Kenneth Fire, broke out and burned 1,052 acres. After 3 days of effort, the fire department reported the fires were still 0% contained. 2 weeks later, on January 22nd, the Hearst Fire began and burned 771 acres. And the same day, the Hughes Fire sparked, and before containment, the Hughes Fire had consumed an additional 10,525 acres. These 5 conflagrations just named, the Palisades Fire, the Eaton, the Hughes, the Kenneth, and the Hearst fires, were the largest of the January fires. There would be 12 altogether in January. The 5 largest spread down the hillsides, through the canyons, and leveled residential neighborhoods, consuming a total of 49,717 acres. Now, I recognize these numbers are often difficult to relate to, and before trying to understand the extent of these 5 large fires, let me mention that during this same period, an additional 7 named fires broke out in Southern California. On January 8th, the Woodley, Sunset, and Lydia fires, consuming 468 acres. The Sunset Fire was, by the way, in the Hollywood Hills, and that threatened and then ultimately, one thought, consumed the famous sign across the hill saying Hollywood. But then it turned out that that image was totally AI created. It's totally fake news. The sign wasn't even close to the fire. 2 days later, on January 10th, the Archer Fire scorched another 19 acres. And on the 21st, in San Diego County, the Lilac Fire broke out and would destroy 85 acres. 2 days after that, the Laguna Fire, 83 acres, the largest of these late January fires, which started on January 23rd, consumed 6,625 acres in the Olay Mountains and was known as the Border 2 Fire. The grand total of acreage burned in all 12 of these January fires came to 56,957 acres, or 89 square miles. That's 21 times the acreage of the city of Decatur. Now, what consumed the news coverage, of course, were the large early January fires, rapidly spread by winds reaching 75 to 100 miles per hour and sweeping through residential areas of the city. And the Eaton Fire, the Palisades and the Eaton Fire were on the news daily. Both broke out on January 7th. The Palisades reported in the morning, Eaton started in the evening, and were not 100% contained for 3 weeks. The Palisade Fire burned 23,448 acres and destroyed 6,837 structures and damaged 1,017 others. The Eaton Fire burned 14,021 acres and destroyed even more structures, 9,418, and damaged another 1,073. But again, I'm throwing too many numbers at you again. So let me put all this in a more familiar context. The largest fire in Atlanta's history was the so-called Great Fire of 1917, which spread from Decatur Street near the future Peachtree Center downtown to Ponce de Leon Avenue in and around Boulevard. Many of the brick fourplex apartment buildings visible today along Boulevard and dating to the 1920s were built to replace displaced houses lost in the Great Fire of 1917. The Atlanta fire was our worst. It consumed 300 acres. It would take 78 Atlanta Great Fires to match the lost acreage in the Palisades fire alone, and 47 more Atlanta Great Fires to equal the Eaton fire. The two together were 125 times more damaging than the Great Fire of Atlanta of 1917. Now let's look at this scale of loss from a different perspective. The 23,448 acres lost in the Palisade fire alone is the equivalent of a fire breaking out in Decatur and consuming the entire city limits of Decatur, plus Druid Hills, including Emory, plus Candler Park, Inman Park, Virginia Highlands, Morningside, Lenox Park, and Grant Park. That grand total of acreage of the neighborhoods so far listed consumes in our imaginary equivalent fire gets us to 1/3 of the acreage of the Palisades fire. Shall we keep going? If our imaginary fire continued to spread, it would consume, in addition to the neighborhoods just named, all of Eastlake, Ornwood Park, West End, Peachtree Heights in Buckhead, and Tuxedo Park in Buckhead. We've now reached an aggregate acreage that is half the size of the Palisades fire. Add in the entire cities of Brookhaven and Chamblee, and you finally reach 24,217 acres, just over the Palisades acreage. The aggregate lost acreage of the four other largest California fires of last January, the Eaton, Hearst, Kenneth, and Hughes, totaled an additional 26,269 acres, which is 7% more than the entire acreage of the city of Sandy Springs. So we can color that part of the Atlanta metro area likewise as scorched earth black. Add all these local communities together, and you can understand the extent of loss from the 5 largest California fires of last January. And to be sure, some of the acreage was undeveloped hillside, national or state forest land, but a great deal was residential community. And as we watched the new news coverage, trying to understand the scope, and for those who travel to the sprawling Los Angeles area, trying to piece together the exact locations of these fires, we naturally inquired whether friends were safe and if landmark architecture had been in the path of the spreading fires. My wife is a member of a British organization with several chapters across the country, and of the Los Angeles chapter, 7 members of that society lost their homes. The news was full of devastation in Altadena at the center of the Eaton fire. Where exactly is Altadena? How close was it, the fire, to Pasadena, which is full of Greene and Greene houses, masterpieces of arts and crafts architecture, such as the Gamble House and the Blacker House, known as the ultimate bungalows? And my friend in Culver City, is she safe from the Palisades and the Eaton fires? Culver City is where the movie studios and back lots still remain, such as David Selznick's International Studios, where Gone with the Wind was filmed in 1939. Or as another friend further north in Carpetanera, out of harm's way from a fire that was reported to have spread north into Ventura County. I found myself checking Google Maps as reports filtered in. What was the status of those Los Angeles architectural masterpieces of the 1920s by Frank Lloyd Wright and Bernard Maybeck, or by Wright's son, Lloyd Wright, each a landmark of Los Angeles area architecture? And how have the mid-century modern case study houses of Charles Eames and Eero Saarinen and others, or the modernist works of Richard Neutra, how have they fared? Research into printed and video news accounts and various Google searches have shaped this special report on Southern California's architecture and historic houses. What was lost and what was saved? Early images recorded fires rapidly spreading through the Pacific Palisades area and leaping across the Pacific Coast Highway, which local television reporters repeatedly referred to as the PCH, as though we all knew what that alphabet soup lingo meant. Well, like television reports showed flames consuming Palisades houses, embers raining down on the coastal highway and beyond, and turning beach houses in prestigious Malibu to rubble. Such on-site coverage immediately brought to my mind the J. Paul Getty Villa, which I recall overlooked the PCH in Malibu. I was convinced it was in the path of the Palisades fire, and indeed it was, although the villa miraculously survived with nearby brush and trees scorched, but no damage to the museum or collections. Black soot settled in the villa's pool, calling to mind, ironically, considering the villa's architectural style, a post-Vesuvian impluvium, or a pool-enriched peristylium of an ancient Roman house. But as Catherine Fleming, the president and CEO of the J. Paul Getty Trust, explained, quote, "The buildings are of super high-rated fire-resistant construction. We've got double-walled structure. There's really significant protection for the galleries, kind of hardwired into the design of the buildings." But the museum's construction is not what saved the Getty Villa. But before describing how it was preserved, let me describe the museum itself. The Getty Villa, designed by famed architects Machado and Silvetti, was modeled on the ancient Roman Villa de Papira, located on the Bay of Naples in Italy and buried in AD 79 by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius. J. Paul Getty wanted his collection of ancient classical art to be displayed in a setting, quote, that would bring the objects to life, unquote. And although most of the Villa de Papiri in Italy remains buried in Vesuvian ash, 18th century excavators had produced drawings of the exposed sections, and Getty drew on these plans and incorporated details from other ancient houses in nearby Pompeii and Herculaneum to realize his vision. The Getty Villa opened in 1974 and contains more than 44,000 antiquities of Greek art from the Neolithic to the Hellenistic era, as well as Etruscan art and works from the ancient Persia and Bactria, ancient Iran. At the time of the Palisades fire, the Getty had mounted a special exhibit on ancient Thrace, a region spanning present-day Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and Turkey, with artifacts of gold, silver, and bronze, and organized in collaboration with the Minister of Culture, Republic of Bulgaria, and the National Archaeological Institute, with museum at the Bulgarian Academy of Science. All this rare museum content was very much in the path of the rapidly spreading Palisades fire, and some film coverage shows the very entry to the Getty Museum aflame. Fueled by 75 to 100 miles per hour winds, the Palisades fire spread to the hilltop grounds of the villa, burned trees and vegetation. But the villa itself and its collections remained safe. Much of the reason was the result of what CEO Catherine Fleming described as, quote, super strong culture of safety. The museum is really safety obsessed, she told the reporter. Systems were in place, and Fleming noted the staff, quote, had been planning for an event of this sort, but certainly not of these proportions. And it all paid off. Fleming explained, and this is a message that many might take heed of, quote, what we have done is just constant and really extensive brush clearance around all of our buildings. We do what's called fuel reduction. So you prune and you thin the trees. You do everything you can to lift or raise the tree canopies up from the ground. You thin out low-level plant materials to reduce the mass, and that really helps to reduce the fire load, and takes a lot of velocity out of the fire as it comes through, unquote. With respect to the Palisades fire, Fleming observed that, quote, the Getty Villa itself, all of the stuff on the ground that was going to burn has burned. A lot of the brush had already been cleared out over the course of the past year before the fire arrived. Moreover, Fleming concluded, Getty is acutely aware of the fact that it's a repository for a global cultural heritage that we hold sort of on behalf of the world, unquote. And so the Getty Villa escaped the Palisades fire at the same time that its sister museum, that huge Acropolis designed by Richard Meyer of high museum fame, located in the Brentwood Hills, found itself close to the other large fire, the Eaton Fire. Richard Meyer's Getty Museum observed approaching smoke, but the complex remained outside the path of the Eaton Fire, which had consumed 14,000 acres up to the edge of the Acropolis. But to return to the largest Palisades fire, it was street after street of residences that were televised ablazed in early January. And after the fire was extinguished, images of homes turned to rubble filled the wire services and newscasts nationally. Los Angeles, of course, is the home of Hollywood celebrities, past and current, and Pacific Palisades and coastal Malibu are communities full of celebrities' homes. And when actors and actresses are earning $1 million or more for a single film, their homes are more likely mansions than quaint cottages or suburban ranch houses. As news reporters commented, the fire did not distinguish between rich and poor. Many celebrity homes were lost, while others were near misses. Paris Hilton, for instance, reported that she watched her home burn on television. And indeed, after the embers cooled, there was nothing left. Tatum O'Neal's house, where her father Ryan O'Neal lived with Farrah Fawcett, was lost. Melissa Rivers, daughter of the comedian Joan Rivers, fled her house, grabbing an armful of personal mementos on her way out, including her mother's Emmy Award. John Goodman's house was totally destroyed, as was Rosie McDonald's. And Billy Crystal lost the house where his family had lived for 46 years. There you can see what was left of that. Jeff Bridges, whose house had been home to his father Lloyd Bridges and his brother Beau Bridges, all three had starred in television's Sea Hunt in the late 1950s, reported his home was lost in the Palisades fire. Actor Leonardo DiCaprio owned a house in Malibu for over 20 years, but had sold it in 2021. It burned in the 2025 fires. Actor Mel Gibson was filming an interview of Joe Rogan's podcast when his $14.5 million home was destroyed in the Palisades fire. Actor Tom Hanks of Forrest Gump fame built a luxurious mansion atop a hill, the White House you see there. And although the flames rushed down the slope to destroy the house next door, you can see the smoke of the house just further up the hill. Hanks' villa was saved. Marilyn Monroe's former residence, now a Los Angeles cultural landmark, was outside the area of the Palisades fire, but only by a few blocks. Jane Seymour's house appeared to be right in the path of the Palisades fire, but was spared in the end. You can see it coming over the hill in the orange tones. As Bob Dylan might have observed, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. And one could not always be sure where the Santa Ana winds would take the fires. The house across the street from Dick Van Dyke was burned to the ground, while Dick Van Dyke's house was untouched. British actor Anthony Hopkins was not so lucky. Hopkins had lost his home in London by fire in 2020, and in California, his Malibu house, a cliffside white colonial revival, was narrowly missed in the devastating 2018 Malibu fire. 2 years later, he sold the house and built another one in Malibu. But the Palisades fire returned to the Malibu coast last January, and Hopkins' new house was completely destroyed. By the way, actors and studios have been quick to donate to fire relief, recognizing the widespread losses of their neighbors. Leonardo DiCaprio, Jamie Lee Curtis, Christopher Guest, and Eva Longoria have each pledged $1 million. Beyoncé has pledged $2.5 million. Paramount Studios and Warner Brothers are donating $1 million each. Walt Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, YouTube, and Google are each pledging $1.5 million. And Amazon, Comcast, and Netflix have promised $10 million. While these are staggering sums, some of the individual mansions lived in by the stars are worth multi-millions. Take, for instance, the Bing Crosby estate. The property in Holmby Hills was the site in 1932 of a large house that's on the screen in two different views, designed by architect Gordon Kaufman for Malcolm McNaughton, and featured in California Arts and Architecture magazine in 1934. Styled with elements of the French Norman, American colonial revival, and New Orleans-inspired ironwork, the house was then sold to Bing Crosby in 1943 and remained the Crosby home until 1964. Crosby sold the house for $350,000 to Jay Frawley, who was the president of the Schick Safety Razor Company, who then sold the property 19 years later for $10.25 million. The new owner was Aaron Spelling, the television producer of such 1970s to 1990s hits on TV as Charlie's Angels, The Love Boat, Beverly Hills 90210, The Mob Squad, and Sunset Beach. Spelling tore down Bing Crosby's house of 1932 and in 1991 built a mansion containing 123 rooms and taking up 56,500 square feet. 56,500 square feet is not exactly a hovel. And Spelling's wife, Candy, took an active part in the over-the-top house design. Candy Spelling, for instance, loved the film Gone with the Wind and built a grand staircase emulating the staircase on which Scarlett, with her new wealth with Rhett, sauntered down in the film. Candy's wealthy husband, Aaron, may well have said, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," as Candy lavished untold riches on the house design and interior decorating. In any case, Aaron Spelling died in 2006 with a net worth of $500 million. Candy Spelling continued to live at the so-called Spelling Manor for another 5 years, but in 2011, Candy decided to downsize and sold the Holmby estate for $85 million. Prophetically, she bought an 8,000 square foot, that's a little less than the square footage of the other house, isn't it? 8,000 square foot beach house in Malibu, which presumably was worth a mere $23 million since she listed it briefly for sale for that amount and then in 2019 took it off the market, but decided to retain the ownership. The Malibu house was completely destroyed in the Palisades fire. There goes $23 million. Initially, it was unclear which Spelling house had been between the path of the Palisades fire, the manor, or the beach house. The former Spelling estate had remained in the news. 5 years after Candy sold it for $85 million, the new owner listed it for $200 million, a price beyond the likelihood of attracting even wealthy Hollywood celebrities. But in 2019, the estate did find an undisclosed buyer who paid $119 million for the estate. This was a record price for California. I thought it would be relatively easy to research celebrity homes and their fate in the various January fires in California, and headlines in TikTok, for instance, offered promise. One headline said, "Celebrities who lost homes in the Los Angeles fires, 2025. Seemed a good clue. And American celebrities lost their houses in Los Angeles fires. Here are before and after pictures reporting on such celebrity houses. Johnny Depp, Kim Kardashian, Paris Hilton, Leonardo DiCaprio, Adam Brody, John Cena, Mel Gibson, Morgan Freeman, Selena Gomez, Tom Cruise, Rihanna, Dwayne Hickman, The Rock, Wentworth Miller, Anthony Hopkins, John Sims. Anybody smell a rat yet? I just showed you 2 Anthony Hopkins' house, and this isn't either one of them. Will Smith, Billy Crystal, Jeff Bezos, Mr. Bean, Ivanka Trump, Elon Musk. Well, first of all, what photographer would be able to capture these houses at their most dramatic moment of flame? And while some of these celebrities did lose their homes, these residence pictures are not the homes of the named celebrities. All of those groups were totally AI generated. Fake news, just like the Hollywood sign that did not burn at all. Anthony Hopkins did lose his home, but it was not the red brick Georgian revival, but a modern house. Paris Hilton's beach house was a total loss, and both Anthony Brody and Billy Crystal lost their houses. But Billy Crystal was not a large Queen Anne Victorian as seen in the burning AI image. Elon Musk had sold all his California properties in 2020, and Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner did have a $23 million house, but it's in Miami. And Jeff Bezos did not buy an LA house on a 10-acre site in Beverly Hills, paying $165 million, a drop in the bucket if you're a billionaire, but it was not a French chateau, as was depicted in the AI images of Bezos' house on fire. So who can you trust? One can confirm the losses of Malibu beach houses of Paris Hilton, Candy Spelling, Jeff Bridges, and Anthony Hopkins. In fact, whole beachfronts of Malibu houses were turned to ash. One section named Carbon Beach was nicknamed Billionaire's Beach. A real estate developer named Grant Cardone bought his Malibu beach house from a Ukrainian oligarch in 2022, just before the Russian invasion. He was trying to sell it for $65 million when the fire spread to this coastline and burned every house on either side of Cardone's and half of his. Others lost beachfront houses that were valued at $4 million up to $40 million or more. Jeffrey Palmer, who's not the actor on PBS, but a developer in Los Angeles building apartment buildings, lost his multi-million-dollar beach house. Music mogul David Geffen owned a property and land previously owned by Doris Day, and in 2017 sold the house to the CEO of the LA Dodgers ownership group for $85 million. That house was lost. Another sports mogul, Herb Simon, who was the owner of the NBA's Indiana Pacers and married to a Thai philanthropist who won Miss Universe in 1988, owned a lavish home on the hillside overlooking the Pacific near Malibu. It too was reduced to ashes. Tina Knowles, the mother of Beyonce and Solange, had a $10 million modernist house on the beach, also lost. You may have heard the name Edwin Castro. He made national news when he won the largest lottery jackpot in history, $2.04 billion. He took a $998 million payout and started investing in property, including a Malibu beach house. It was lavish as a modern house and included a multi-car garage where Castro stored his classic car collection. It too was burned to the ground in the Palisades fire. Model Bella Hadid has her childhood home was also a prominent residence along the Malibu coast, this time styled in the regional Spanish colonial revival. The property was purchased for $4.5 million in 2007 by Bella's mother Yolanda and music promoter David Foster, and the house appeared in Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Yolanda sold the house in 2015 for $19.4 million. That's a profit of $15 million in 8 years. That's not bad. At the time of the fire, the house was listed for sale for $35 million, jumping another $15 million. These two images show the fire aflame and its ruined condition after the fire was extinguished. Another residential loss was the house owned by 29-year-old billionaire Austin Russell, the force behind Luminar Technologies. Russell's house was valued at $125 million. He had paid $83 million a few years earlier, then pumped it full of technological innovations. I think to get in his bedroom, you had to have a retina scan, that kind of thing. And the house had commanding views over the hillside, a stunning coastline. It contained 18 bedrooms and 6 baths. In reporting on the fire loss, a reporter stated that the Palisades fire did not just damage his home, it obliterated it. Two of the most palatial houses in the area were owned by Britney Spears in Thousand Oaks in Ventura County, a 13,300 square foot colossal porticoed mansion, which Britney bought in 2015 for $7.25 million, and Cher's Italian Renaissance revival palazzo overlooking Malibu. Ever the publicist, Britney basked in the publicity of having to flee her home as the flames approached, but her house was unharmed. Cher's was more of a close call, as the smoldering brush in the foreground of this image suggests. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, Cher owned more than one house in the LA area, although DiCaprio's, in his case, and you can see one of his houses, but in the top left part of the screen, you see an aerial view that looks down on a compound of 4 houses. He bought the first one from Madonna and then started building or buying houses adjacent to create this kind of compound. Cher, on the other hand, bought and sold as her mood changed, including an inconspicuous English bungalow purchased in 2013 for $2.1 million and sold in 2019, and a Moroccan-style house in Benedict Canyon, Beverly Hills, which she later sold to Eddie Murphy. Her 2 most famous houses, though, were bought with Sonny and Cher, Owl Will Estate, a 1936 mansion on 10 acres, which she purchased for $750,000 with Sonny Bono. The historic house was rich in interior materials. There were 9 marble-floored bathrooms, carved woodwork, and elaborate marble mantelpieces enriching public rooms. 2 years after her divorce from Sonny, Cher got the house, by the way, in the settlement. She sold it in 1976 for an undisclosed amount, and the new buyers had it on the market again in 2019 for $115 million. It didn't bring that much, but it did finally sell in 2021 for a mere $88 million. But the house that Cher called home was her Malibu Palazzo, a grand Renaissance revival mansion, complete with pool and guest house, tennis courts, palm tree grove, and overlooking the Malibu beach houses below. Destined, those houses, to be victims of the Palisade fire. The 13,126 square foot house was designed by Martin Bullard in 1999 on a site that Cher had purchased for $1.5 million. There was a handsome entry gate, arcades overlooking pools, pointed and cuspate arches, giving the openings a kind of medieval or Moorish character, and a splendid Gothic revival dining room, rivaled in California only by Julie Morgan's dining room at San Simeon for William Randolph Hearst. The whole seemed just right for the stylish Cher, who always did have a flair for fashion and beauty, characterizing her career from the days of Sonny and Cher through Moonstruck to today, where she continues to wow audiences as a singer and actress. Cher's hilltop Renaissance villa survived the fires. Historic sites associated with other historic personalities did not, however. The Zane Grey estate, associated with the great populist author of Western novels, found itself in the path of the Eaton fire. The main house was designed in 1907 by the noted California architects Myron Hunt and Elmer Gray. It was in the Mediterranean style and was ironically acclaimed as the first fireproof house in Altadena. In 1920, Zane Grey bought the home, but it was consumed in the fires you can see on the right side. Another site associated with Western lore is the home of the so-called cowboy comedian and raconteur Will Rogers. An early postcard shows the house newly built, and a photograph of about 1930 from the Santa Monica Public Library offers a black and white view. An extended rotunda served as stables for the ranch house. Will Rogers was the most popular and highest paid Hollywood actor in the early 1930s. He bought this land in 1920, developing a ranch of 186 acres overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Will Rogers was killed in a plane crash in 1935, and when his wife died, she left the house to the state of California as a memorial to Will Rogers, and the site became a state park. The Palisades fire drew no distinctions as it blew through the Pacific Palisades, burning the Will Rogers Ranch and leaving rubble in its wake. Elsewhere in the Palisades, the so-called Pacific Palisades business block of circa 1925 was destroyed, with its burnt-out interiors gutted beyond charred facades. As we move to report on other destructions, the town of Altadena becomes central in discussing the damage wrought by the Eaton fire. Public architectural losses in Altadena included several churches, which were central to the sense of community of the neighborhoods. The Corpus Christi Church and school were reduced to a gutted metal frame and debris. In nearby Pasadena, the Pasadena Jewish Center and Temple was completely destroyed. The Altadena Community Church was reduced to a small fragment of its facade still standing, and the church gutted. And one of the major estates of Altadena, the Andrew McNally House and Gardens, was completely lost in the Eaton fire. Andrew McNally made his fortune creating maps. He and William Rand founded the Rand McNally Company, a printing company in Illinois, in 1856. In 1880, McNally took his fortune and moved to Pasadena. And then in 1887, he built his shingle-clad Queen Anne mansion in Altadena. Frederick Rohrig was the architect of the house, almost 7,000 square feet. The house had 22 rooms and was completed in 1890. It included lavish gardens, which were developed, and the house itself was a late 19th century showpiece. Its prominent three-story corner rotunda offered views to the San Gabriel Mountains to the north and Los Angeles Basin and Pacific Ocean to the south and west. McNally died in 1904, and the house was neglected but served periodically as a filming location after 1921. The house was restored by the Dupuy family, who owned the property between 1955 and 1921. The entry stair hall was not unlike Eastern interiors of the late century designed by such architects as H.H. Richardson, while its most exotic room was unquestionably the Turkish room. The house was sold in 2021 for $3 million when the Eaton fire began nearby, and winds spread it within hours to 10,000 acres. The McNally house was in its path. And the house and grounds were completely destroyed in the fire. You can see the fire burning that rotunda capped roof. A landmark house such as Altadena's McNally Mansion brings us to our last theme of major landmarks of architectural design lost in the fire. Los Angeles is noted for excellence in 20th century design, from the works of Pasadena architects Greene and Greene to Bernard Maybeck, who built $1 million house in Los Angeles in 1927, to Frank Lloyd Wright whose concrete block houses of the 1920s constitutes an important body of work during his middle career. Wright's son, Lloyd Wright, also practiced in Los Angeles. Then in the 1940s and the 50s, mid-century modern was no better on display nationally than in the case study houses of Los Angeles, sponsored by the magazine Arts and Architecture. Architects Charles Eames, Eero Saarinen, Pierre Koenig played leading roles, and contemporary houses by Craig Elwood, Gregory Ain, John Lautner, and Richard Neutra are equally noteworthy. These are the masters of modern architecture in California, and our report on the status of fire victims and near misses would not be complete without giving account of the status of these masterpieces of Los Angeles modern architecture. First, I was led to study the map of Pasadena to ensure the work of Greene and Greene, so prolific in this area, had survived. The so-called ultimate bungalows of the Gamble and Blacker House were both out of harm's way. As was, indeed, the bulk of other Pasadena residences by the two Greenes. However, on the right side, a small Greene and Greene house, the 1904 Serrurier house in Altadena, was lost in the fire. And that got me searching other Greene and Greene houses in Altadena, the epicenter of the Eaton fire. The results were mixed. A very early Greene and Greene house, built for James Swan in 1898, that was only, I think, 4 years after the brothers formed their practice, was known as Torrington Place and reflected influence from Eastern Shingle and Queen Anne styles in the East. It was built 4 years into the practice. A quarter century later, in 1925, Henry Greene remodeled the house, giving it a stucco and more Mediterranean exterior. You can see the original form and then the remodeled form on the top. And I'm showing you one of the California Fire Department's fire maps, which they were very quick to get online. They put red dots on every house in any single area and black dots on the houses that were saved. The red dots meant that the fire had consumed them. So I'm putting an arrow straight to where the Swan House is, and you can see there are all kinds of red dots above it, but it's barely outside that area and still stands. Another Greene and Greene house for William A. Bowen was built in 1903 with the second floor added a couple years later. It was destroyed. The fire map shows the house in red with the arrow pointing to it and several houses around it, whereas to the other side of the street, most of them are black, which means they're okay. This was, of course, the very edge of the Eaton House fire, but the Bowen House is now in rubble. Bernard Maybeck's only Los Angeles area house was built in 1927 for car dealership mogul Earl C. Anthony, for whom Maybeck had also built monumental auto showrooms in San Francisco, in Oakland, and in Los Angeles. Only the San Francisco showroom survives. But so does the Anthony House in Los Feliz. When I visited the house in 1972 as part of my dissertation study of Bernard Maybeck, I found it had just been converted to a convent. The California Institute of the Sisters of the Most Holy Immaculate Heart of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It was their home now. At its peak, it housed 100 nuns who thankfully were preserving the house relatively intact. They did convert one room to a chapel and allowed me to tour the interior. It was funny because my professor went a year later, they wouldn't let him in. In 2011, however, the convent population had dwindled and the nuns were aged, and the Archdiocese of Los Angeles ordered the nuns to leave the convent in 2011. At this point, the story gets really rich now. Pop star Katy Perry stepped in to buy the estate for her personal home and offered $14.5 million, which the Archdiocese of Los Angeles supported. 2 nuns from the convent, probably the only 2 that were still living, they were in their 80s, claimed to be the rightful owners since the nuns had pooled their money to buy the house in the first place. And despite Katie's being the daughter of a pastor and a former gospel singer herself, her current persona did not appeal to the nuns, who disliked her lyrics, especially one that made some comment about making a pact with the devil, and so they refused to close the deal. Instead, a restaurateur, Dana Hollister, offered $15.5 million and moved in on a slim down payment. She planned to convert the estate to a hotel. Perry sued, presumably claiming the nuns did not own the property, but the church did, and the judge decided in her favor, indicating further that Hollister had interfered with the Perry sale with malice and fraud. The judgment against Hollister required her to pay Perry $6.5 million, damages, and additional monies to the nuns, the whole said to be about a $15 million judgment. Hollister declared bankruptcy, and the nuns, who opposed the sale to Perry to begin with, appeared at the bankruptcy court on her behalf. During the proceedings, one of the nuns, Sister Catherine Rose Holtzman, collapsed and died. In 2019, 81-year-old Sister Rita Callahan was the last living member of the convent that occupied the Anthony House. Katie Perry seemed to be back in the picture, although her $14.5 million offer had expired. To further complicate matters, the Catholic Church required that any sale over $7.5 million had to be approved by the Vatican. And the Vatican required that a substitute active church be found to replace the Anthony Convent. According to the Los Angeles Times, as of 2021, which is the latest I've been able to find, the Anthony House remains vacant and unsold. The Los Angeles fire might have settled the matter, but Los Feliz was out of harm's way in the area where this house is located, and was really nowhere near any of the 12 fires. In the meantime, Katie Perry has bought another $15 million house in Montecito near Santa Barbara, although she's now embroidered in a lawsuit with that previous owner, an 85-year-old dying veteran whose family characterized Perry as entitled, greedy, and unforgivable for evicting him from the house he had sold to her. He was there renting it for a while, but not paying rent, I guess. The courts upheld the sale, though, but that, of course, is a whole other story. 2 major players in the 1920s Los Angeles architecture were Frank Lloyd Wright and his son, landscape architect and architect Lloyd Wright. The 20s was the era of the elder Wrights' famous concrete block houses, the first of which, the Millard House of 1923, was built in Pasadena, not far from Greene and Greene's Gamble House, and out of harm's way from the Palisades fire, which was the closest one to Pasadena. In fact, the several houses of both Wrights were sited in the Hollywood Hills, Brentwood Hills, and Los Feliz neighborhoods, which is a large area between the Palisades and Eaton fires, but unharmed by either. So I was happy to find that the Ennis House, the largest of Wright's concrete houses, is safe. So too was the Storer House, a smaller one. 2 unique Wright houses were also unharmed by the fires. The Hollyhock House, built for Elaine Barnsdall between 1918 and 1921, may be Wright's best-known Los Angeles area residence, and one of the 8 Wright buildings recognized internationally as a UNESCO property. None of the fires came near the property. Wright's first Los Angeles area house, which he described as his ode to California, and he intended it to be a centerpiece of a 3-acre complex, which was not totally realized. But today, the Hollyhock House is owned by the City of Los Angeles and is operated by the Department of Cultural Affairs. Wright's son, Lloyd Wright, followed in his father's footsteps, utilizing concrete block in an even more exotic fashion than his father. The Soden House in 1926 sometimes nicknamed Jaws because its entry has been described as appearing like the open jaws of a shark, is more properly inspired by the patterned surfaces of ancient Mayan architecture. There was indeed a Mayan revival in evidence during the period, influencing Mayan revivalistic forms of Robert Stacey Judd in the west and setback skyscraper forms of Alfred Lord Bossum in the east. Lloyd Wright's Soden House in Los Angeles is a masterpiece of this play of exotic ancient forms and decoration. Keep in mind this house is contemporary with the preliminary plans for the Fox Theater in Atlanta. And indeed, there are Mayan theaters built in Los Angeles, Detroit, and likely elsewhere. Lloyd Wright's Soden House is likewise sited in the safe zone beyond the neighborhoods impacted by any of the fires. Two later houses by Elder Wright are worth mentioning, both still intact, although one was very close to the fire, as you can see by this arrow. Wright's Alfred Newman House was built in Pacific Palisades in 1947, a location that brought me some concern. It was at the edge of the massive Palisades fire destruction. Lost houses on this house are shown in red, and the Newman House located is shown in black, and in fact is undamaged. This is what it looks like. It's a 1940, late 40s project. And other Wright houses built near the Palisades about the time Wright designed Falling Water is this superb cantilevered house for George Sturgis. It dates from 1939. Falling Water is in that same era in Pennsylvania. And so he's obviously playing with dramatic cantilevers, the most he can do. A similar thrusting of a living room and tears out from a brick core rooted deep on the sloping hillside. And while the Sturgis house is located not far from the Getty Museum, it was just outside the area damaged by the Palisades fire and remains safe. However, I've always been mindful that in Los Angeles, second only to fire threats is the potential for mudslides, and I doubt that I would be comfortable sitting in the cantilevered living room despite Wright's claim that he was America's best architect and his taproot ideas for engineering were safe. On the other hand, I learned that the house was owned by Jack Larson, who played Jimmy Olsen in the Superman television series in the 1950s. So if there was any trouble, George Reeves, aka Superman, would come to the rescue. Finally, we come to the case study houses in the 1940s and 50s. They introduce us to lesser-known architects, but undeservedly lesser-known. Sponsored by Arts and Architecture magazine, headed by John Intenza, for whom case study house number 9 was designed. The case study houses were intended to be demonstration residences that showcased inexpensive materials of steel, glass, concrete, and a minimalist aesthetic, creating some of the most noteworthy houses of their period. House number 22 of 1959 to 60 became iconic due to a popular photograph by Julius Schulman showing a seated woman, glass-encased living room, and terrace with building lines aimed dramatically out to the skyline of Los Angeles. The house was constructed on what was considered to be an unbuildable site, and it may be the most published of the case study houses. The Stahl family paid $13,500 for the lot in 1954, and the house cost $34,000 to build. The pool was an additional $3,650. The family was later offered $15 million to sell the house, but refused. The iconic photograph by Julius Schulman, the photograph is said to be worth $50,000. The house is still owned by the children of the builders. Among architects and designers, the case study house number 8 of 1949, the home of designers Charles and Ray Eames, may be the best known. It is a steel and glass house, although double height, in the tradition of contemporary glass houses by Philip Johnson and Mies van der Rohe, that is the Glass House and the Farnsworth House, both from the late 40s. Views of the Eameses at home, surrounded by their collectibles that seemed almost at odds with the minimalist glass walls, were widely published, and as the Pasadena fire approached, curators began to remove various bits from the house contents. It came very close to this enclave where the Eames house is located. And what made this more problematic is right next door, case study number 9 was designed by Eames in association with Eero Saarinen, who is the designer of the St. Louis Arch and Dulles Airport and a variety of other really prominent modern buildings. This is an early project with Eames in collaboration with Saarinen. And that was built at the same time for the client, John Intenza, the very editor who was sponsoring this whole case study program. Although the Palisades fire got very close, the Eames complex remains undamaged. One of the California masters of mid-century minimalism in architecture was Craig Ellwood, and thankfully 2 of his best-known residents remain out of harm's way. See, this, by the way, is the John Intenza house, which is next door to the Eames house. You can see it's under construction in the top left, and there you can see in the bottom left the other house under construction. They're basically frames of steel that are wrapped in glass. The Craig Ellwood house from 1961 for the Rosen family is square in plane and elegantly Miesian in detail. It certainly is a homage to the German architect Mies van der Rohe. The precision of detailing, where steel meets dark brick, seems an embodiment of Mies's oft-quoted phrase, "God is in the details." Noteworthy also is Ellwood's famed Hunt house in Malibu, right along the Pacific Coastal Highway. You can go for miles of that devastation, and then it stops, and there are houses again, and just maybe not even a fifth of a mile up is the Hunt house, just barely outside of the Malibu beach house lost. So miles of devastation along the beachfront suddenly give way to intact houses, and just beyond that is the Hunt house. Pristine in its elegance, reductive in every line, geometric to a fault, and the epitome of abstraction in architecture. Craig Ellwood's 1952 Zach House, however, was completely destroyed in the fires. Other celebrity architects met with mixed results from the 5 storms. Charles Moore's Burns House, a client like Burns, you'd think that, well, it made it through. 1973, despite its client's name, was southeast of the Palisades and did not burn. But architect Gregory Ames' 1948 Park Planned Homes community, contemporary with the case study houses, was entirely lost to the fires. Richard Neutra's Benedict and Nancy Friedman house of 1942 was a classic mid-century modern work, publicized with classic photography again by Julius Schulman, and considered a major work of the Austrian transplant architect Richard Neutra. The Freeman house burned to the ground, as did Neutra's Kessler house, while his much earlier, there's the Kessler house after the fire. But luckily, and one of probably Neutra's most famous house is the Lovell House, which is much earlier, an international style building in 1927 to 1929, and it was out of the fire's path and remained safe. Structurally dramatic residences of later brutalist style were also lost. Robert Bridges built his own house between 1979 and 1989, cantilevering terraces out from the massive concrete piers. But after the Palisades fire, only a skeleton remained on the hillside. Ray Kapp's house for jazz singer Ann Keeler, noted for its dramatic cantilevers and brutalist concrete walls and flowing spaces, was also lost in the 2025 fires. And finally, moving forward to postmodern era, we note as well the loss of Eric Owen Moss's 708 house, a 1982 remodeling of an earlier case study house that had been designed by Milton Cawley and said to be Moss's, quote, exuberant testimony to the lighter side of the deconstructionist movement. It was designed for the architect's family, but it was located in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood and was destroyed in the Palisades fire. Individual property owners have expressed wonder when houses all around them were burned to rubble, but a single house on a street or hillside was untouched. The fire map in the neighborhood of the Villa Aurora, for instance, shows the villa in black, undamaged, while houses below are all in red, burned in the fire. The Villa Aurora was built in 1928 by Mark Daniels, and since 1943 was the home of Leon Foswanger, who hosted German emigres. Over the years, the villa has served as an artist's residence and meeting place for composers, filmmakers, writers such as composer Arnold Schoenberg, novelist Thomas Mann, playwright and poet Bertolt Brecht. Architecturally, it is a notable example of the Mediterranean or Spanish colonial style. It's oh so California, and it's perched untouched on the hill right on the edge of the Palisades. Such institution, landmark buildings, exemplars of architectural excellence in evolving styles and streetscapes are part of our cultural memory. In the end, we must not forget the loss of ordinary houses, of ordinary people, neighborhoods, communities, and familiar places. For so many, their personal losses are more significant than the multi-million-dollar second or third homes of rich celebrities, or perhaps any building that in the end can be replaced. Perhaps not with the skill of a Frank Lloyd Wright, a Craig Elwood, a Bernard Maybeck, or the Greene brothers. Yet, renewal is the theme of the moment, and one hopes beyond the rebuilders that the rebuilders among the rebuilders will be architects of high merit. It is those masterpieces of architectural design that we care for collectively, that we had hoped had survived, and that we are gladdened when we learn that a great work of design was out of harm's way. Thank you. I don't know if you have a favorite house you want to ask about. I've been in the throes of looking at so many. I may know something more about them. But
about a year ago, you do a walking tour of Georgia Tech.
excuse me.
About a year ago, did you do a program where you did a walking tour of Georgia Tech in the historic buildings?
My best solution for that is to buy my book in the back, which is a campus guide to Georgia Tech. It's got every single building on campus.
About that book.
Yeah.
You were here about a year ago.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, say.
Eric Lloyd Wright's son lost his house.
His own house?
Yeah.
Oh, did he? Yeah.
He designed it with his father. I sat on the foundations with him one night in the 80s, and it was beautiful watching the sun go down in the Pacific and the lights of LA rise up on the east side.
Is this in the Malibu area? Is this
Yeah.
it was with these latest fires that he lost it?
Yeah, the latest fire.
Yeah, I hadn't come across that.
Yeah, Eric's son Devin told me about the other fire that came through and destroyed all of his father's drawings. Yeah, Eric sent me some copies over the years.
I think one of the houses had a lot of Arnold Schoenberg's compositions and musical scores, and some of that got lost in one of the fires. It's unfathomable to really think of the scale of this, and we know of so many places that we have been to or love to see or have learned about in school or whatever. Yes.
Do you know if most or many of these houses have insurance?
Well, insurance is a really big problem. What I've heard is that most of the insurance companies dropped the whole area about a year ago, stopped giving insurance. And so they had a lot of trouble to maintain it. And how extensive that was, I don't know. I think it would be really troublesome to get much of insurance in any reasonable way at this point.
Whether the neighborhood is modest or not, or luxurious?
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, when insurance has been raised in any kind of news report, it's not been a happy subject. So, yeah.
I don't know if this is right. How many square miles burned out there?
About 89 square miles.
So I'm just reading that the inside of 285 says it's 63.98 square miles
So the whole
for inside the perimeter.
whole inside of the perimeter plus.
So,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, Jennifer.
What are the prices of some of these But I was just thinking of the people that would own those homes would have equally fine stuff inside. Is there any estimate of what the personal belongings that were lost would come to?
One of the really exacerbating, problems with this was the wind was blowing so extensively that even if they saw something way in the distance, they didn't have a lot of time to even get out. So people literally were grabbing a few things they could throw in a pillowcase and running. And I mentioned the thing with Joan Rivers' daughter because you can just imagine she's gonna grab an Emmy off the mantelpiece and maybe a couple other things, and she's out the door because there just is no time for much else. And people tried to think of what might be the most important thing they'd want to take out with them. Yeah.
I'm going to ask, the ordinary neighborhoods were destroyed, huge numbers of people were displaced. Where have they gone and what are they doing now?
They've had a number of relief people come into some areas that were outside the district. The news was broadcasting that hotels were doubling their rates when they found that people needed to rent, someplace because they had no place else to go. And same with some of these available apartments that people try to go. Some of the celebrities, I'm trying to think of who it was leaving one of these houses, drove 4 hours to a hotel, to just to stay there till the thing got under control. But it was taking 2 or 3 weeks to even get it contained. So most of the people just assumed they lost everything, and so many did. Sometimes there were real oddities. They had a few people on some of the newscasts that would show a whole block on both sides of the street was completely leveled and just absolute rubble, and there's one house sitting there just untouched. There's a photograph of St. Mark's Episcopal Church, and the photograph is taken through the arch, which is all that's left. You're looking through, and everything beyond looks like Armageddon. But way in the distance is one small Christian Science church, a white colonial church that seemed to have been untouched. And who knows? It's just most of everything. In the Palisades area, it just was a whole swatch of. One of the things that's remarkable is to take this last map. It's an interactive map, and you can continue to blow it up, and you literally get right down to a street, and that big blob of red becomes a series of individual red houses that shows a devastated house. And every once in a while there'll be one that's black that says it's not damaged, but mostly, that you can pretty well tell how extensive it was in that one image. Yeah.
Did you see any statistics on the businesses because certainly there were lots of small businesses at least, if not large.
I've forgotten who it was, but
being destroyed would mean people would be left unemployed as well as.
Yeah. I showed that one historic 1920s Palisade commercial block that was gone, but someone else was talking about some local shop that they used to go to all the time that it was gone. These things would be like some of our neighborhoods. There'll be a small little commercial district of maybe half a block of commercial buildings or something like Little Five Points or something like that. And so there'd be a concentration of things that people relied on, all kinds of services, but they would be gone as well.
Well, my friend, I just spoke with her today. She lives in Altadena, and she lost everything. Everything on her block, and then also behind her were a lot of little shops. It's an older neighborhood.
Yeah.
She's found she stayed with a friend for a few days. She had her car and her cat and her computer, and the electricity was out, so there was no evacuation orders. But the electricity had been shut down, and then they just saw there was fire nearby, and just got up and woke up in the middle of the night and left. But she stayed with a friend. Now she has an apartment. So a lot of the people, at least the way she's talked, a lot of the friends are helping friends, but looking for, and she has insurance. Insurance will pay for her apartment for 2 years. And she wants to rebuild, and she will be interviewing architects, but she doesn't really know, this is all new to her,
Sure,
you know?
yeah.
But she's, you know, that's what her friends in Altadena are doing. They want to rebuild, and they're just trying to figure out, you know, what's the next step.
Yeah. Well, there were announced through news casts what they called evacuation zones, but two things were problematic with that. One is that the fires were moving so quickly that changed constantly, and what you might define was the extent of it might get tripled within 20 minutes or something, you know. And the other thing is just what you say, if you lose electricity, you don't get those televised announcements or get anything where the information doesn't even get to you. So mostly people were just seeing it coming and running and getting out of it.
Well, there's some of her plants are growing up out of the ash outside, you know, so it's nature has their way.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the things, there was an actor, Steve Gutenberg, who was in a lot of things in the 70s and 80s, and he is the honorary mayor of Palisades, and they interviewed him several times. One of the things he said that I had not ever considered was the fact that all these servants and other workers in these big mansions, most of them didn't speak that much English, and he was worried that they would not be able to understand where they were supposed to go.
Yeah, that would be. Well, and we were talking earlier that one of the things he was telling people that if you're going to leave your car, leave your keys in the car so that they can move them, because what ultimately happened so many times is the cars just got pulled over and there was blocking lanes, and then fire trucks couldn't get through, so they literally had to park the Red Sea to get the cars out of the way. And ultimately, then the fire would catch up to that neighborhood and the cars would be ruined anyway, but it was a mess. Well, thank you all for coming. See you in Egypt in a couple of weeks.
These photographs were so incredibly dramatic, the fire and the devastation. Do you know if they were original